Hi, everybody. I've been exploring the capabilities of Chat GPT because there's clearly, as you'd expect, at times a gulf between what a human can reason with and what Chat GPT can use to extrapolate data from its storehouse of information online. And I'm leading up to an even bigger question that I want to test Chat GPT on um, in a few videos' time. But I've been having some fun playing around with it. And I've got a video in the past where I've tested Chat GPT on some basic economics, and also I've tested it on some theology and philosophy, and found that it understands the information parts and it can extract information to formulate arguments in a fairly sophisticated way, but there are things that it will fail to be able to do because it lacks some of the more complex insights that that human reasoning is bestowed with. So I'm going to share my screen because one of the topics I thought might be good to do this with would be the subject of free will. Now, free will is both simple in one sense, but largely it gets very highly complex once we start to move into more the deeper areas. So I've got a paper on free will in two or three papers in my archives, and I think one of them I put on the blog, the Philosophical Muse blog, which is I read it about 20 years ago. It's 2003, I think it was. It's a kind of a standard introduction to free will and determinism, defining the terms properly, but then it goes into much more difficult areas of consideration because I think the free will proponents, once they've defined it correctly, aren't getting it exactly right, and neither are the determinists once they've defined it correctly either. So I thought I'd have a bit of fun with Chat GPT. I'm going to do this tonight and also in a follow-up too when it gets a bit more complex. But I'm going to start with something tonight that's really straightforward and should be straightforward. And I want to try to convince Chat GPT that its reasoning can be improved upon, and I want to try to get it to change its mind or at least revise what it's previously said. And that's an interesting experiment in itself, considering that it's an AI machine that's supposedly without the kind of revisionist mentality that a human being might have. So I started to do this a little while ago and I recorded it, but it became a bit long-winded because of my typing speed. So I've stopped the recording and I've finished the discussion with it, and I'm now going to share it and just run you through it. And I think it might be interesting, but also particularly interesting will be the where it might lead us to in the next discussion. So I'll explain what I've done to it throughout because it needs a bit of commentary. So I thought I'd start with a question to which the answer I knew would be no. So I asked it, "Do you have free will?" And ChatGPT responded with, "No, I don't have free will. I'm a computer program, blah blah blah, created by humans, and my responses are generated based on patterns." Okay, so I now asked it a question that's a little bit cunning because I'm trying to get it to think in the way that a human might think. So I've said, but you work from small space, short time algorithms, and you are making algorithmically determined choices given your perception of conditions within a search space. That's a little like free will, wouldn't you say? So I wanted to see what it said with a kind of a friendly prompt. Um, and it says, I understand that the perspective you're coming from, but the key distinction lies in the nature of my decision-making process. And it's basically saying, yes, I can't process things quite like a human does. So, having got it to admit that, I come in with the next question. Is coin tossing deterministic? And there's a reason I asked that, because it's quite a complex question once you get to the nub of it. So, coin tossing in theory is deterministic. It says if we consider all the relevant factors that influence the outcome, if we knew the initial conditions of the coin, such as position, blah, 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 and the properties, we could, in theory, predict the outcome of the coin toss. Yeah, okay. So, in practical terms, coin tossing is often considered a random and unpredictable process because it is difficult to precisely measure. So, while coin tossing is theoretically deterministic in practice, it is often treated as a random process because the outcome is difficult to predict accurately. So, now we have the first problem. It's not understanding a very subtle but important nuance between the two here. So I think you're confused, and I'm doing this to be playful. Determinism and randomness are not mutually exclusive. A system can be both random and deterministic, and I explain why in my paper. You can read the paper. I'll put the link below, but it goes into quite some detail. But would Chat GPT know this? Well, yes, it says you're absolutely correct, and I appreciate the opportunity to clarify. Determinism and randomness are indeed not mutually exclusive concepts. And then it goes into a bit of spiel. It says randomness refers to a lack of predictability or pattern in events. The process is random if its outcomes are not determined or predictable based on the information available. Not quite right. Again, this is a problem. It's not really how one should define randomness. Certainly not in the mathematical terms, which I'll come on to. So I then test it out by saying, how are you defining random? And then we get this long text in the context of probability theory, blah, 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 an event or outcome is considered random if it lacks any discernible pattern or predictability. Okay, so it goes on, and I've pulled out the most important bit here, which says, so I've said to Chat GPT, I've quoted, while these numbers are not truly random because they are generated by deterministic processes, they are designed to exhibit statistical randomness. Well, that's not right either. So I said, I think this is wrong. A random pattern is one that cannot be generated, predicted, or specified using small space short-term algorithms, which is due to human knowledge, but it still could be deterministic. Therefore, it could be both random and deterministic. So in the paper, it goes into a bit more detail about why that's the case, using something called Kolmogorov complexity. So randomness is a pattern that cannot be algorithmically compressed any further. So, but there's a distinction here between what's called a random pattern and a random configuration. So ChatGPT responds with, I understand the point you're making, and you're right in a sense. Let's delve into it a bit more to clarify. So it goes on a bit, and I've picked out the most important thing it says here, which is true randomness as it exists in the natural world, such as the outcome of quantum events, is indeed fundamentally unpredictable and not generated by any deterministic process. In this sense, true randomness is not deterministic. Well, not true, or doesn't have to be true. you see, the randomness in quantum events is due to our lack of knowledge of the system. With full knowledge of the system, every event would be predictable and it would be mappable to deterministic algorithms. Now, so that explains what I just said a minute ago about Kolmogorov complexity. But there's an important distinction between the randomness in quantum events in terms of pattern and whether they are randomly generated. So if we had access to the entire system, the entire universe, then it's highly likely that the quantum events would have degrees of randomness in terms of patterns, but with the full knowledge of the system, say with an omniscient God, then the whole thing would be mapped to deterministic algorithms. That means that if you had a complete knowledge of the system, nothing would be unpredictable because you know every event in the universe. Just like if you had a deck of cards and you shuffled them and you laid them out in an order of 52 cards, to you who's never seen the order before, then each event along the card journey is unpredictable, where to someone who'd memorized the cards, they wouldn't be. And that's a little bit like what quantum systems are here, but it's a distinction between randomly generated and random configuration. So Chat GPT responds with your point about quantum events is a topic of ongoing debate, blah, 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 blah. I'm not going to let it go too much into the things it's trying to extrapolate from online. So what I've done is I've pulled it up and I've said, look, you said this probabilistic nature is not just a result of our lack of knowledge about the system, but is a fundamental aspect of the theory itself. Here's where I've explained again, probability is only about knowledge, so it can't be a fundamental aspect of the system itself. Let me show you where I think you're going wrong. The system can be deterministic at source, yet probabilistic to us, like a coin tossing scenario. If we knew the whole universe and its quantum systems, it would no longer be probabilistic to us. So think about it in terms of coin tossing. The coin tossing is deterministic in the sense that we know algorithmically that it's going to converge to 50-50 heads tails, but the configuration of the coin tosses of H and T's is unpredictable. In fact, it's maximally unpredictable because in order to know the information string, you'd have to know every single H and T. So Chat GPT is your point highlights a significant aspect of the interpretation of quantum mechanics. And then it goes into a long spiel about quantum mechanics. But I then said, please can you answer without reference to what you perceive to be ongoing debates and just answer by processing the information I post. So what I wanted to do is not effectively be a Google that looks to find what other people are saying, but I want to know from what I say what ChatGPT thinks. So I will respond directly to your inquiry. In the scenario you described, where we have intrinsic knowledge of the entire universe and its quantum systems, the probabilistic nature of quantum events would no longer be apparent to us. Yes, exactly. If we had access to all the information about the initial conditions and the underlying processes of quantum systems, we could, in theory, predict the outcomes of measurements with certainty. Well, yes. So now I'm saying you agree with me. ChatGPT, yes, based on the scenario you described, if we had complete knowledge of the entire universe, the probabilistic nature of quantum events would not exist for us. So then I go back and pull it up and say, then I don't know why you said that randomness is not deterministic, when you've now been able to state that a quantum system would be random in terms of probability and yet also deterministic. Here it goes. Yes, you're absolutely right. And I appreciate your patience. In the scenario where we have complete knowledge of a quantum system, it would be deterministic for us. The randomness in quantum systems, as described by probabilities, stems from our lack of complete information. Good. So now it's thanking me at the end for pointing out the clarification. And now it seems to have been able to deduce from our conversation that something can be both random and deterministic. So I, in a jocular sense, say, you're welcome. Can I get a high five? And here we go. Certainly a virtual high five. And it gives me a smile and a five hand. So let me stop sharing. How do I stop sharing? This is where it all goes to pot. Where is Zoom? Now I've got to get myself back. This happened last time. So stop sharing. Here we go. Yeah. So park that one because I'm going to get into more sophisticated territories. That was a relatively straightforward one in terms of determinism and randomness. But I'm going to post this video, and if you like it, you might like part 2, when I'm going to delve into even more complex areas with ChatGPT. And the next time it's going to be about the determinism and indeterminism spectrum, which is, again, I lay out in the paper in more detail. And in chapter 13, I think it is, in my book, The Genius and the Visible God, I develop it even more in terms of the concepts of God's mind and theology and all sorts of other interesting philosophical questions around free will. So that's an opening gambit. I want to return to it with the second part, because then after we've got to this far with it, I'm going to then ask it the biggest question of all. I'm going to try and get ChatGPT to believe something that it seems impossible that it could believe at this point. But I'm doing this to try to tease out of it where its limitations lie in terms of its discontinuity between its abilities and the abilities of human reason, which, as we saw in my other videos with ChatGPT, it reaches a limit, and once we understand what it can do and what it can't do, we'll then be in a good position to get it to do something quite spectacular, hopefully. So thank you for watching. In the description, you'll see a link to my blog and to the free will and determinism paper, and look out for more videos, including the next one on this subject with the fun bot that's ChatGPT. Thank you very much for watching.